team here. Excellent. All right, welcome back, everyone. I'd now like to welcome representatives of the Department of Home Affairs to give evidence today at this public hearing. Now, for the Hansard record, could I ask that you all state your full names and the capacity in which you appear today?
Thank you, Chair. Sally Pfeiffer, First Assistant Secretary, Critical Infrastructure, Partnerships and Policy from the Department of Home Affairs.
It's quite a mouthful, that one, but thank you for that, Sally.
Christopher Fox, Assistant Secretary, Screening and Maritime Security Policy from the Department of Home Affairs.
Matthew Pedler, Assistant Secretary, Aviation Security Policy, Department of Home Affairs.
Jennifer Ellison, Director, Transport Security Reform.
Excellent. So now, Matthew, could I just ask you to move that book out of the way, just for more for Hansard? So, thank you. Thanks a lot. Okay. Now, thank you for also providing a copy of your opening statement. Did you want to read or add anything else to that? No, otherwise, we're happy to table that opening statement and go straight to questions. Yep.
That's fine.
Okay. And before I do that, I should just also remind everyone that that today's hearing, even though you are not required to give evidence under oath, you are advised that this is still a legal proceeding of the Parliament and therefore has the same standing as proceedings of their respective houses. Given false or misleading evidence is a very serious matter and may be regarded as a contempt of the Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard and attracts parliamentary privilege. I'll now hand over the call to Deputy Chair to kick off with questions.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you for coming in this morning. To the Department's knowledge, what's the reason for the compressed time frame for this inquiry?
Thank you, Deputy Chair. The time frame, we've had an extensive time frame for discussions of the proposed way forward. We have been talking about the measures that we were looking to introduce, what we were looking to change in response to the Heartland Review.
Can we get a bit more volume, please?
Sorry, I'm a little quiet.
That's better.
I have never been accused of that before. So. We have had an extended period of consultation and engagement with the industry sectors that are impacted by the transport security reforms over a number of years, including from when the Heartland Review was initially finalised and then consultation from there. So there has been quite a period of time. In the sense of the more immediate time frames, there are requirements for us to meet certain deadlines to achieve the objectives of introduction, and we were able to meet those. But we built that on the basis of the extensive consultation that we had done with industry.
I don't know that answers my question. And you may not be able to answer it, I understand, but there is very much a compressed time frame for this inquiry. Also, there is a compressed time frame for stakeholders to be able to respond. I think the previous witnesses were talking about 5.5 days to respond to the bill. I appreciate there's been, I think it's fair to say, extensive consultation over a number of years, but 5.5 days is an inordinate short period. Would you not agree?
Senator...
No, I'm not a senator.
Sorry, Deputy Chair.
I work for a living.
I apologise. I do apologise. Deputy Chair...
Out of order there, Deputy Chair.
You're outnumbered.
Whilst there is a short period of time, the 17th to the 24th of October, that was the first pass impact analysis consultation process, there were consultation papers and the early assessment of the impact analysis were provided to approximately 3,000 individuals of industry stakeholders between the 22nd of May and the 11th of July. We conducted 2 town halls, 3 industry roundtables plus 3 costing ones, 3 tables, roundtables that focus on the costing processes.
Yeah, I'm not being critical of the department's overall consultation. I mean, many of the stakeholders have come before the committee and have said that the consultation has been extensive. I suppose what concerns me greatly is the compressed time frame in which the stakeholders had an opportunity to provide feedback to the department, and what I'm particularly concerned about is the time frame in which this inquiry has been so compressed. What's the rush? Given that we've been dealing with this since 2021, and then all of a sudden, we need to deal with this matter by the 7th of March. What's the issue in relation to the 7th of March?
The timeline for this committee's consideration is actually not at the department's request or
okay, but I accept that, but can you shed any light on why there is such a compressed time frame for this inquiry to be able to report back to government?
Again, sir, Deputy Chair, I'm unable to comment on the timeframes for the committee's consideration.
Okay. Multiple submissions raised concerns regarding the regulatory impact and cost burden created by the bill. Has the department considered whether the regulatory impost could be pushed onto consumers? And what does your modelling suggest the additional cost to consumers will be?
I'll ask Ms Ellison to discuss, to provide evidence regarding the impact analysis and the cost to consumers. Of course, we're always very concerned about costs to the public, but our first priority is to consider the security of our transport security industries to make sure that those security measures are effective and protect the Australian public. It is certainly a balancing act.
Yeah.
Ms Ellison, can you discuss the impact analysis?
Thank you, Sally. The impact analysis was conducted with industry. We only received 4 submissions from both maritime and aviation sectors that would assist us to analyse the costings. But in terms of passing it on to consumers, that's a matter for airports and airlines.
Would you mind just saying that again, that the cost to the public is a matter for the airports and airlines, but you're building a regulatory regime that is going to impact upon them, that they are going to have to pass those costs down to the public. What modelling has the department done to determine what those cost impacts will be?
We conducted an impact analysis last year with industry. So we drafted an early assessment impact analysis and provided that to industry with the consultation measures, and we gave them from the 22nd of May to the 11th of July to provide costing impacts to their entity. In response to that consultation, we received 4 submissions from both aviation and maritime sectors. Based on those 4 submissions, we were unable to form a comprehensive view, so we used costings from the SOCI Act, and from that we developed costings based off industry complying with the regulations, having a baseline of not having any mitigation measures for any of those all hazards. So if we were to work out what those costings were based on whether or not an entity was mature and had those obligations already mitigated, that would reduce the price, or the cost, sorry.
So the answer to my question is that there's been no outcome. You haven't come up with costs as to what this bill will do for costs for consumers. Am I right?
We've come up with what it will cost industry, and then...
How have you done that when the industry's been, I think it's fair to say, critical that you haven't provided the regulations? How do you, as the regulator, determine what cost impacts there will be when you haven't provided the details?
So, Deputy Chair, we do have information regarding the bill, and we have done some initial work and provided industry advice on how we intend, based on the bill as it currently stands, to work through the regulatory process. So we have provided information regarding the regulation without providing the draft regulations.
Well, they're all sitting before us saying, the devil's in the detail, we don't have the regs. I think that's a pretty fair complaint that they're making, isn't it? Why haven't we provided the regs to them?
As I was saying, Deputy Chair, we have provided information around our intention of how we will be preparing the regs, the framework that we'll be using, and have had initial discussions with industry regarding those regulations and the way that we propose to use them and to affect things like removal of duplication. We will continue to work with industry through that process. The impact analysis was based on and continues to be based on the information that we've been able to provide at this stage and extensive consultation with industry around the intent and the way forward that we're looking to take the regulatory framework.
Why haven't we provided copies of the draft regs? Is it because they just haven't been finalised, or what's the rationale?
We are preparing the regulatory framework as part of the discussion. However, we would like and have continued to engage with industry on a model where we evolve the regulations as we move forward based on the way that the bill will be amended. Sorry, the Act will be amended.
I get by the very nature of regulations that they are, and Ms Swanson made a very good point that, you know, legislation, particularly in this sector, has a real job in trying to keep up with the threat levels, and this committee knows that better than any committee. But it's also equally important, I think, when we're dealing with, particularly when we're talking about the cost impost of these changes, that the stakeholders are aware of what it is that what the regs are going to say. Now, I know you can't say what the regs are going to say in 12 months' time or 18 months' time or 2 or 5 years' time, but if you're asking them to come on board with you, and you've heard the phrase, you know, co-designed process, there's varying levels of acceptance of to what extent the department has included these stakeholders in the co-design. Some, particularly in airports and airlines, airports feel as though they have been less included in the co-design process than, say, what the ports were just a moment ago. But have you looked at, has the department looked at the disproportionate impact on regional airports as opposed to, you know, your large city airports?
Yes, Deputy Chair, we have considered that, and the reform package, the legislative package that we're putting forward, is actually scalable depending on, particularly I'm speaking of the aviation sector at the moment. So not all of the measures apply to all airports or to all airport industry participants. It's scaled on the basis of the tier of the airport. So as you would be aware, we currently have designated airports, Tier 1 airports, Tier 2 airports, depending on their complexity, the sectors that they might particularly be working in, size, those sorts of things, and the requirements, the regulatory requirements, will not be applied to all of the airports. So regional airports, and particularly small airports, will see little to no impact of these changes.
Where would the Sunshine Coast Airport, for example, fit into that paradigm?
You're trying to promote Sunshine.
I am always trying to promote the Sunshine Coast. Unashamedly, that's my job.
I must say the Sunshine Coast Airport is one of our particular favourites, and we do enjoy the Sunshine Coast. I'll ask Mr. Pedler.
Don't forget.
And Newcastle.
And Tyre.
Deputy Chair, I think Sunshine Coast, I believe, is a Tier 1 airport, if I recall correctly. I'll have to correct that one. But so there, in terms of the all hazard security obligations, the obligations would apply to Sunshine Coast Airport as they would to Newcastle Airport. So as Ms Pfeiffer said, we have 9 designated airports, 5 Tier 1 airports. I think it is 44 Tier 2 airports, all of which do screening, but to different standards. Then there are Tier 3 security regulated airports that don't do screening. There will be different graduations of the obligations that apply, but at then that larger end of town, designated and Tier 1s, then all of the obligations in the package will apply to those airports.
And have you done any modelling on what the cost impost will be for the various tiers?
I'll just turn to Ms Ellison and see if you have the cost study there.
From the 4 costing submissions that we received, one was from a regional airport, and they advised that due to the smaller nature of their airport, the resources that they employ, it might cost 7.5% of what a designated airport might cost in some instances. So in terms of what we received out of that process from industry, it was difficult to come up with a comprehensive analysis, but we used the data from the analysis done through the SOCI Act, which has the same obligations, to help inform our view.
Well, that sort of opens the door to the duplication issue, doesn't it? A number of stakeholders raised complaints this morning and in their submissions about the duplication of particularly particularly around all hazards. What do you have to say about that?
So, Deputy Chair, and listening very intently this morning to the participants and some of the things, and I think there were some of the issues that were raised was duplication, or that there was already existing arrangements across a few different frameworks.
Yeah.
So I might just break that down a little bit. So there was raised about duplication under the SOCI Act, so that there are currently a number of airports and the airlines who sit within SOCI as well. Not all airports sit within, are regulated or fall under the SOCI Act. Same with maritime ports. There are 20 ports that meet the definition of critical ports, and so therefore are under SOCI Act as well. So there is at the moment a differential between the broader industry in aviation, transport, security and maritime and offshore facilities, and then regulation of SOCI. The intention is, and what we have worked with industry to try to ensure that they understand, is that there are currently obligations under SOCI for reporting of cyber incidents. Those, once that is available under this legislation, those obligations under SOCI won't be utilised under that Act for those participants.
Won't be required.
Won't be required under SOCI. The reporting, the obligations will fall under ATSA and MTOFSA, so to reduce any confusion around the reporting requirements for that particular Act. The other issue that I had raised was regarding particularly around the natural hazards, and that actually exists under the safety framework. And whilst that is true, that there are aspects under the safety framework, regulatory framework, that require a natural hazards consideration, those considerations do relate, as they should, to safety, and don't really reflect the nature of the way that we would like to have security considered for natural hazards. One of the things that was, one of the recommendations from the Heartland Review was to consider the way that SOCI formulated an all hazards approach as a more robust and more holistic consideration of the security requirements, and that is what we're trying to achieve by considering the all hazards approach in this package.
I asked the question of the airlines whether the all hazards approach that you want to introduce here is being done anywhere else in the world, and the response was not in countries in which they're operating. Not that I have any objection to Australia being world-beating or world-leading in certain circumstances, if it's appropriate, but is this first-of-type legislation in the world?
It does sound a little disingenuous to pat ourselves on the back to say that we're world-leading. So I would say that yes, we have considered our partners and asked them about what they're doing. To be fair, while they are not currently implemented, we know that there are efforts underway to consider introducing this all hazards approach across, and I think you particularly mentioned Canada. We've worked quite closely with Canada. They do have a slightly more layered approach. They consider critical infrastructure, which includes transport, and are looking to introduce an all hazards approach within their framework for critical infrastructure. There are also considerations under their transport security, equivalent transport security legislation to introduce a broader frame around all hazards as well. So whilst we may be forward-leaning in where we are in the cycle, I think that we certainly have evidence that our partners are considering that. I'd also just turn to Mr Pedler to mention recent considerations that in Oman as part of
Thank you. We heard testimony this morning about Annex 17 and a sort of inconsistency with Annex 17 with our approach. Annex 17 deals with security. It is true that at the moment there is no language around natural hazards or all hazards in that document. However, there are many discussions taking place in the ICAO under the Annex 17 framework around this. Annex 17 is not a static document. It's a living document, and in fact ICAO in December last year there was a security forum in Muscat, Oman, where ICAO made a declaration, and if I can just read a small part of that, which acknowledging the importance of a common UN approach involving cooperation and coordination among all relevant UN bodies and specialised agencies in recognising the aviation sector as critical infrastructure on which national security, prosperity and development, as well as the global economy, are dependent. So certainly taking the critical infrastructure approach in which we are mirroring the obligations from the Security of Critical Infrastructure Act and putting them into the transport security legislation, the ATSA and MATOFSA, is certainly consistent with the way that many discussions are taking place around the world.
Can I take you to the 10C authorised access issue? You may have heard me speak to the ports people earlier before. Is there any recourse or cost recovery mechanisms for businesses that are impacted by authorised actions?
Deputy Chair, no, there are not. As the Ports Australia representative indicated, the MATOFSA is not the appropriate avenue to pursue that type of action.
In relation to compliance statements, can you confirm whether organisations must update their maritime safety plans immediately post legislation, or can they wait until renewal?
The intention is that we are not requesting updates for the maritime security plans. They will need to be considered, and they would be done over a period of time, which is why we have a sort of period for introduction of the processes as we do them. The intent is not to require an immediate change to maritime security plans post introduction of the passage of the
What sort of timeframes do you envisage them having to be able to do that?
I think that would it's the next. It would be at the next update. Although
on renewal. On
renewal.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to say that I think that depends also on the maritime security plan. There's an option for industry participants to amend before their renewal as well. So if they chose to, so I don't want to say that they must wait either.
No, sure, yeah. No, but there would be a maximum time frame at renewal. Does the proposed definition of ports have any differentiation between industrial and recreational ports, such as cruise terminals?
I'll ask Ms Fox.
The proposed definition of ports, no, we're not sort of differentiating, but if it's a security regulated port, we don't differentiate between it, and some ports are security.
Sorry, go on.
Some ports they might have a cruise terminal as part of their security regulated port. Others those recreational facilities might not be part of it. So every port is different.
Every port is different. Could this have an impact on the tourism sector for, say, cruise terminals?
I wouldn't see why.
If you're unable to, if your answer is every port is different, every port would be considered on its own merits. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. So every port, in redefining the port boundary, will be considered on a case-by-case basis in consultation with that port.
So it's possible that cruise terminal ports could be captured by the legislation. That would have an impact on tourism costs, wouldn't it?
Yes, but those ports are already captured. So a cruise terminal already has some obligations. The changing of the definition of a port, I don't see how it would in particular impact a cruise ship.
The scope, the amendment doesn't bring into scope additional cruise ports that would be impacted by additional cruise ships.
Are you satisfied with the clarity of the definition of ports?
I think we've recognised that it is a real challenge, as Mr Gallagher and Mr Tierney said this morning. It has been a concern, and it's something we've recognised with industry, and we're very keen to continue to work with industry. Ports have evolved over time. They're very complex in their nature, as described, the participants and the diverse nature of the various elements of what's required to operate with a port and those complexities. So we have very much recognised that is a complex issue, and wish to continue to work with industry to refine and continue to think about how we can make those definitions clearer and more workable, and to improve our understanding of ports.
How do we do that? Is that in what environment is that done in? I'm just concerned that the regular or the department is acknowledging that there's a degree of lack of specificity in the definition, and yet we're being asked to make recommendations to the Parliament that the bill should proceed to being passed, and yet you're here saying we accept that this is a problem.
We accept that there is a requirement to continue to engage with industry, and I think based on, and I don't want to verbal Mr Gallagher or Mr Tierney from this morning, they were very clear though that they believe that we've recognised the concern, that we are very alive to it, that we're working with them. I think the way that we have put it within the proposed legislation is to provide some scope for us to then continue to work with them through the regulatory process, the development of regs process, but also our ongoing industry engagement. We work very closely with the maritime and the aviation sectors. We have regular ongoing engagement and consultative forums that we work with them on these issues to try and resolve. We are also doing some extended research work that we're looking to understand the criticality of ports, and that to add to our understanding of the nature of ports as they are in this modern environment.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to hand over the call now to Ms Swanson.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Ms Pfeiffer. Look, some industry have shared frustrations. You've sat in the room and heard those frustrations, and I couch this question with, we're living in an ever evolving, rapidly changing security threat world, a quickening of tempo. I think that obviously industry representatives from the aviation sector recognised that in their statements this morning. So the bill proposes expanded definitions and security requirements and things that, you know, are going to need to be changed. So we can't change the consultation, and we've heard a graduated response, I would say, from 8 out of 10 from the ports for your engagement to whilst the aviation sector didn't give the department a score, I would hazard a guess to say that it was not 8, it was less than that. So what I'm really interested in, if this bill is to pass, it seems to me that the regulations are really the critical point. How does the department intend to really meaningfully consult, co-design going forward? What's the time frame with industry on the regulations? For me, that's where the rubber hits the road on this bill. You know, if we're going to recommend that it be passed and that it should go ahead, how are you going to? Because this is critical. I mean, as Australians,
Absolutely.
we've all got to work together. We keep saying that, but yet we get people in a room and they say, well, look, we just don't feel as though we've been consulted with properly. The time frame's been compressed. You feel as though you've done a good job of it. So, you know, you sat in the room this morning, you heard the evidence. So moving forward, how do we make this right? How do we make it better so that, you know, people in the aviation sector can say, well, yeah, you know, we feel as though things have improved. How do we write these regulations? What do we do? What's the time frame moving forward?
So we're very keen to continue what we consider quite an extensive consultation and framework that we work with the industry participants across maritime and aviation. We, as I just mentioned, we have groups. Obviously, the aviation cargo sector is different to the aviation airline sector, so there are complexities in this environment. We do consultation with them as a whole and as a town hall style engagements where we try and seek views, broad views, and have also conducted consultation at more granular level by splitting the groups into various sectors to get a narrower view, a more deep dive into particular concerns of the subsectors within the aviation sector as well as the maritime sector. So we continue to do that and will continue to do that. Our next steps are very much that we are ready, subject to the passage of the bill, to engage very deeply on the regulations and the next process for consultation with that. What we would like to do is to work with the sector at large, because there are interplays between those segments within the sector, so we don't want to lose that view, but then deep dive within regarding the specific nature of the impacts for each sort of segment within the broader sector. That is the process that we're planning on right now. So the team are already developing that framework in the event of the passage of the bill, and would be keen to engage with industry as soon as we start. What we would do is we don't want to preempt anything by presenting here we've drafted something. What we've done is prepared our thoughts around the way that the regulatory framework would operate, what we see the impacts might be, and then what we want to do is work with industry to present those and then get their feedback and their understanding of what that might mean in practice as they operationalise those intents that we are looking to present to them. I think this needs to be an iterative process. We can't expect that we're just going to get it right the first go, and we definitely don't want to do that, because it means that we need. It means that we're not working closely enough with industry if we are doing that. Very much, we would like to take the opportunity, as I said, to work in an iterative way that allows for us to present options, ideas, get that feedback, have industry have some time to consider their views, then bring that back to us and work through that in workshop-style approaches.
And are there any urgent security gaps that are going to be met by the passing of this bill? what are the big ones?
We have great concern regarding the threat of cyber. Cybersecurity is of great concern to us, and having heard your questioning earlier, I think we're all very alive to the fact that our acts have not been substantially changed for a very long period of time. So it really doesn't conceive beyond the initial threat of terrorism the types of things that we are now seeing in that threat environment. Cyber threat, to be honest, in addition to cyber threat, insider threat, risks involved, foreign interference threats, those sorts of issues were really not forefront of the way that the legislation was framed up. All of those are in a completely different situation now, and the Director General ASIO's presentation last night certainly narrowed focus around the impact of those risks and threats to critical infrastructure in particular. And for us, the aviation and maritime sector are the backbone, really, of our critical infrastructure. They're so fundamental to our way of life, our economy, and our supply chains. They are actually incredibly fundamental to all of that. As an island nation particularly, the maritime cargo issue is really important to us. And Mr Tierney mentioned the impact of their incident, and that on a more national scale would be something we would never want to conceive of. Currently, our legislation does not have provisions around cyber security. We have worked very closely with industry and asked them to look at this risk, and we believe that most industry participants have taken that completely on board, and even our friends at Qantas, we're very aware of the efforts that they've gone to do that, but it's not sitting within our framework at the moment, and that for me is the real gap in our current framework. In addition, I think the other threats around insider threat and some of those other things can't be underestimated as we move forward.
And just on that, in relation to some of the Commonwealth agencies that stakeholders have identified that they already report to, so they report to CASA, they report to the Australian Transport Safety Bureau, the Bureau of Meteorology. The bill requires them to report to both Home Affairs and ASD, ASD particularly withstanding cyber and the increased threat that poses. But what are we doing to streamline some of that reporting? Because look, I am hearing, and I do understand that we're in an incredibly delicate balance here between a requirement to report so that people at ASD get the frontline information, yet we do have organisations that are often saying that they're tied up in red tape, so we've got to have a balance. So in terms of streamlining, what's your thinking on that at this point?
So under the Cybersecurity Strategy 2023 to 2030, there is a measure in there that is actually looking to facilitate or create a single reporting portal for incidents.
Yes, I've got that to ask you. How's that going?
Yes,
yeah.
So that work is being progressed at the moment to avoid the duplicative reporting process, and that is something that my colleague, Mr Anstey, it sits within his portfolio of responsibilities, and he has been, I know it's certainly front and centre of the activities that we are looking to progress in that cyber security space, and it's really critical that we have that, because we don't want people to be focusing on reporting or multiple reporting regimes when they need to be dealing with a crisis. So it's certainly something that we want to do. The point of the portal is to simply have a single point of reporting, and then all of the agencies who need to have access to that information will be able to draw forward the information they need for their specific purposes.
And just two more, if I may, Chair, just on this same thread of thought. Harmonisation with state and territory-based reporting requirements, has that been considered as well?
Absolutely. work very closely with our state and territory counterparts. Something that we do in our critical infrastructure framework is we have our what we call SIAC, so the Critical Infrastructure Advisory Council, which has representatives from our critical infrastructure network. Our Trusted Information Sharing Network is our network of critical infrastructure industry representatives. The SIAC includes representatives of state and territory governments with a view that we are trying to then harmonise or bring together a conversation about the requirements layered across government and industry. It also includes representatives from Commonwealth agencies who regulate the various entities as well.
And I suppose going the other way, going sort of downstream to state and territories, Mr Gallagher mentioned the international window, a maritime single window. Can you speak to that and how that will intersect? I suppose it follows on from the Deputy Chair's comments about Canadian experience and you know, us being world leaders. But so how does that intersect with this bill and what will that mean for... I know it's maritime, but...
No. Happy to discuss. So I think there's the two acts that we have, so APSA, which is aviation, maritime, MATOFSA, maritime and offshore facilities. One of the reasons that we have those acts and that we have considered and retained them as separate acts rather than, I suppose, there would be an argument to merge them in with critical infrastructure areas, because both of these industries have there are international frameworks and international obligations which we take very, very seriously. Mr Pedler mentioned our ICAO, which is the aviation. There are similar sort of international organisations around the maritime framework as well that mean that we need to meet and continue to meet those international obligations. Separate to that, we have relationships with our partners globally, many nations, to work on consistency, because these are global systems that we need to work within that framework. So there are clearly those obligations that we have under those oversight bodies formulated under the UN, but then there are our international relationships which allow us to work with our partners, learn from them, see what they're doing, see what can work in our context as well, and be able to draw that together. One of the things that we do is seek for opportunities for international partners to come and present to our industry reps about what they're doing, what they're seeing, so that we can expand their threat and understanding. Ms Fox, have you got anything to add on the window that...
Sure. So the maritime single window is a platform for industry to provide regulatory information regarding the arrival and departure of ships into ports. So it's very separate to cybersecurity reporting and separate to the portal that we're proposing. But I guess just another example of trying to find an efficient way for our industry sectors to adhere to their regulatory requirements.
I mean, surely technology is our friend in this regard. I mean, we've got incoming cyber attacks and that poses all kinds of threats and difficulties. But on the other side of that coin, we've got technology. I mean, I can go on my phone and tell you where every ship is currently in the world. I think that's remarkable and I quite enjoy it. But, so are we embracing that as well,
Absolutely. We are looking to find ways to streamline and to bring industry, to bring us into the way that we can operate to make it as efficient and as effective as possible for industry to comply with regulatory requirements. Absolutely. We also need to make sure that those systems are safe, secure, robust, meet the requirements of us and industry, and make sure that we aren't creating potential problems by bringing things together in a way that maybe isn't secure. But we're certainly working on that, and that's a big priority for us.
Sorry, Chair, just one. So should the committee wish to recommend the passing of this bill, do we have the department's word that you are going to genuinely and in good faith, continue your interaction with particularly the aviation industry and other stakeholders? Because you sat in the room this morning, they're clearly unhappy and we need to sort it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks for that, Ms. Swanson. Just following up from that, I was just hoping from an early question, I think Mr. Wallace may have asked, but hoping that you might be able to talk through the consultation process. And in light of what Ms. Swanson said, any further opportunities from post today about dealing and engaging with the industry, because we've heard obviously quite a large number of evidence before us, and just want to make sure that there is a clear understanding that the industry is still able to consult or at least engage with the department on this issue.
Absolutely, and our door is always open for industry if they feel that they want to raise issues with us. I'm more than happy to hear from them. I will start in terms of a consideration of our consultation process. Following the reporting of the independent review, and we had a discussion paper responding to the independent review as well. There were 12 incidents of engagement, including town halls, roundtables, a public town hall that was open to a very broad range of stakeholders, even outside our normal industry perspective, industry players. As I said before, we broke that down, some of that consultation down by segment, because we want to give an opportunity for particular sectors to be able to provide input into. So air cargo, regional aviation, aviation more broadly, maritime separate. So there were 2 rounds of sort of round table conversations, one in May, one in April, and that was to allow industry the opportunity to consider what was put forward as part of those conversations and then come back to us with further questions. So those were conducted, like I said, between 10th of May and the 4th of April. We also consulted regarding the specific consultation on the drafting measures, the measures that we had considered and our early assessments. We conducted a further 11 town halls, roundtables and impact analysis costing sessions, again broad groups and then more detailed groups including aviation, air cargo and maritime, to make sure that there was opportunity for sector-specific nuanced conversations. In addition to those, we also held Transport Security Reforms Town Hall. One was held on the 13th of November. That was a very broad group that allowed as I said, not just the usual players that we engage with. We have obviously sector groups that we work with on a very regular basis. We also conducted a town hall on the 21st of October specifically to address the first pass impact analysis and provide opportunities for further discussion on that. We also have a transport security industry advisory committee that we stood up. There were 2 meetings for that group on the 30th of May and the 17th of July. Those are a cross-sector group that we have drawn together for those discussions. And as I said, in terms then of those are opportunities for forums. In addition to those, we actually have a series of engagements across the sectors which include the maritime, I'm going to get the name wrong so I might ask Ms Fox to correct me, Maritime Industry Consultative Security Forum, which is our maritime group, which is representatives from ports and port operators across Australia that meets on a regular basis at least 3 times a year. Normally at least one of those is a face-to-face meeting and the others are normally virtual to allow optimal participation in that process. And then we also have within the aviation sector a group specifically for regional aviation participants, as well as an air cargo forum, and also includes consignors and air cargo operators that are outside the airports, as well as a forum for a broader aviation security forum. Those meetings, again, similar to the MISCF, occur with each of those groups around 3 times a year, just depending on availability and criticality. Again, we operate those as in person as well as virtual to maximise opportunity, particularly for regional airports that may struggle to be able to come to events on a regular basis, to maximise participation opportunities for engagement. At those forums, we have discussed the broad, the framework and the proposal on the way forward from the independent review and what we were proposing at each of those meetings over the last, 18 months. Sorry.
Because I mean, a number of submitters have expressed, I guess, concern about maybe the perception of the department's adopting a more punitive approach as a regulator, and I was just wanted to see if there'd been any effort to talk to them about the importance also having a much more educative approach. And I'm glad you picked up the small airports, because I think there was greater concern from those entities, organisations, around how the department might be perceived in terms of its approach towards airports.
Certainly, smaller airports are a concern for us, and we go to great efforts to work particularly with regional airports. As Mr Pedler sort of mentioned before, the very small airports are not regulated entities for us. So whilst we still may engage and make them aware of the activities that we're doing, they're not regulated entities. It's only once we get into the tiers of the size of the airports that we work with. We're very open to working with industry, particularly all of our industry participants, to make sure that they feel comfortable and understand. The point of our regulatory, the way that we work within our regulatory framework is a framework that clearly has harsher measures or firmer measures that we would use in the instances where we see non-compliance that is something that we feel can't be rectified or we can't work with. However, we work in a very collaborative manner with industry and with individual players when we see areas of concern to try and mitigate and change those behaviours or those concerns, those issues that we might see arising, and work within a continuum of looking to inform, make sure people are aware, excuse me, of their regulatory requirements, education, then moving towards more firmer measures, depending on if we are not being able to see the amendments and the change in the way that we want to see industry.
So what's your assessment if change does not occur? The impact that will have, the threat levels that will have on the sector or the economy?
With the change with the Act?
Yeah.
I think there are real exposures and gaps that would make it very difficult for us to manage the type of significant cyber incidents or the significant type of living off the land type activity we've seen with things like Volt Typhoon that we know have occurred in other countries, particularly the US. We've seen reporting regarding those things. We really, this Act and the way the amendments that we're proposing are there to help us to work with industry to really understand what those threats are and the impacts and the flow-on impacts from those. And I think Mr Gallagher, in his discussion this morning, mentioned supply chain and those concerns. For us, critical infrastructure and transport, this transport sector in particular, are so intertwined and so codependent. The aggregate risk that we see across those critical infrastructure, it's really important for us that we have a baseline understanding and a baseline that we can work with industry about what we need to do to protect our critical infrastructure.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I think Ms Mackenzie had
She's ducked out, but I do know the question she was going to ask.
If you could ask the question on her behalf.
Thank you.
And then we'll wrap up. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair.
Deputy Chair.
Just in relation to the cyber and national security risk profiles, does the department consider a longer transition period than 12 months could be feasible, particularly for regional and small airport operators?
I think we did mention earlier, Deputy Chair, regarding the scale and the way that impacts, and I think if your interest is particularly for the smaller and regional airports, the cyber security provisions are not looking to be applied to those smaller airports. Is that your particular concern?
Yeah. Looking at the implementation timeframes.
Yeah. So, look, I'd be happy if
Deputy Chair, if I can just paraphrase you there, I think the AAA said this morning that they were hoping for it to be extended to 24 months rather than 12 months. That was their ask. Yeah.
So thanks, Meryl. Is that something that you would consider as appropriate?
I think that's something we could take under consideration and discuss with government and consider that.
Ms McKenzie?
And just to that end, it was on the same point. So I have a small airfield in my electorate. I assume that airfields that aren't currently regulated by CASA are beyond the remit of this.
If they're not currently our regulated entities, which I can't imagine that would be, they would not be impacted by this.
So even though they're part of the ecosystem and all the supply chain sometimes, not.
They're not current.
All right, well, thanks everyone. Thank you to the department. Thanks to the committee members. There have been no other witnesses.